So hi, I'm Adrienne Eaton. I'm the program chair for this program and the president-elect of LERA. And I am here now just to introduce our plenary speaker, Jacqueline Patterson, who is the director of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program. So when we were constructing the program, I reached out to several people to help me identify somebody who could speak on some aspect of jobs and the environment and climate change. And I just wanted to give a shout out to my Rutgers colleagues, Todd Vachon and Vila Townsend, who helped with this task. And I also forgot this morning to thank Todd, who really helped me quite a bit with drafting the original call for proposals. But anyway, Jackie was recommended to me, and I think you'll see why. Since 2007, Jackie has served as a coordinator and co-founder of Women of Color United. She's also worked as a researcher, a program manager, a coordinator, an advocate, and an activist working on women's rights, violence against women, HIV and AIDS, racial justice, economic justice, and environmental and climate justice. Jackie is the author of several articles, including two that I think might give you a feel for how her interests connect to ours here in LERA. One is Jobs versus Health, an Unnecessary Dilemma. And the other is Just Energy Policies, Reducing Pollution, Creating Jobs. Her book chapter, Equity and Disasters, Civil and Human Rights Challenges in the Context of Emergency Events, caught my eye, given the COVID moment, when people of color have been disproportionately affected by the virus, both in health outcomes and economic impacts. Jackie holds a master's degree in social work from the University of Maryland and a master's degree in public health from Johns Hopkins. She currently serves on the International Committee of the U.S. Social Forum, Steering Committee of the Interfaith Moral Action and Climate, and a number of advisory boards and boards of directors. Jackie's speech is pre-recorded. I don't know if we're going to have time for Q&A, but tee up the speech, Emily or Bernadette. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, take two. I just did this entire presentation and then looked back and realized that my face was frozen and that the camera was no longer operating. So anyway, this should go much better now because I've rehearsed the entire thing. Anyway, good to join you all. I think I've already been introduced, so I won't tell you who I am or anything like that. I'll just go straight to it. I'm looking forward to having this few minutes to talk with you about the intersections of environmental injustice, climate change, workers' rights, and opportunities in the new energy economy. So I am going to share my screen, and hopefully this will go smoothly. Awesome, so far so good. From current slide, still recording. Okay, everything looks good. I'm gonna be very vigilant this time. Okay, so yeah, so the moment that we're in really just reinforces the information and the images on this slide. We have this historical context of the rampant extraction and exploitation of human and natural resources. And I say that the moment calls to this because when you have peoples that came to this country as cargo in the hulls of a ship, right away it establishes the perception or the valuing of the lives of that group of people. And so when you've got Black folks who were brought over from Africa as not being seen as human, being seen as cargo, lined up in an area that wasn't even meant for humans, it really has continued on in terms of the dehumanization of our lives, our very existence, and of the objectification of our lives and existence and the exploitation of our labor. This country was built by the labor of enslaved people to a significant extent. And that enslavement continues on in some ways with the institutionalized racism and how it's continued to oppress and suppress the advancement. Yet still, folks have been resilient and have achieved and have claimed space and power. And at the same time, there is concentrated power and wealth that continues to systematically fight against our very existence. And we share that with the way the earth has been treated in ways as well, in terms of just instrumentalizing the earth's resources and bounty without regard for the ecosystem. And so we see where we are. We've gotten to where we are as a result in terms of facing and experiencing catastrophic climate change. And all of this extraction, exploitation, domination is institutionalized by our policies, our trade policies, our manufacturing policies, our finance policies, our labor laws or lack thereof. And it's all, at the expense of human rights and earth rights. A quote from Martin Luther King: "I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take the necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few." Says it all. So we've done a number of reports along the years to really illustrate the ways that our environmental injustices disproportionately impact African-American communities and Latino communities, as well as indigenous communities and low-income white communities. This report is Fumes Across the Fence Line, where we talk about the health impacts of air pollution from the oil and gas industry. Put out the report Cold-Blooded: Putting Profits Before People, that talks about how 68% of African Americans live in counties and live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant, and we pay for that with our health in terms of some of the very toxins that are tied to respiratory conditions and so forth. So we have African American children who are 3 to 5 times more likely to enter the hospital because of an asthma attack, and 2 to 3 times more likely to die of an asthma attack. And we also know that the whole coal extraction and production continuum is harmful. 76,000 coal miners have died of black lung disease since 1968, while the National Mining Association has fought against the very protections that would have preserved or at least lessen the impact of coal mine dust on their lives. They also have fought against families who are seeking compensation or just support in the courts and paid doctors to say, oh, it's not black lung disease. It's something else, tuberculosis or other types of diagnoses, when it's clear that it's black lung disease. So this has happened way too many times. Then we also talk about other types of energy production and harms to human health. One researcher has done a lot of studies around the impact of nuclear reactors on infant mortality, particularly in African American children. And when we even talk about the alternatives to these harmful industries, we have our practices of ways of generating energy. Even as we talk about natural gas, it also causes harm, whether it's the polluting of the water. And in one case, a number of cases, but one particular home in Ohio, in Granger Township, the home exploded, and they tested and found that the explosivity level in the water was 20%. And I guess the allowable explosivity rate, which I didn't know there was one, is 1%, according to EPA. And so we also know that African Americans and Latino Americans actually are more exposed to air pollution, be yet less likely to actually produce pollution, less likely to do the level of consumption that attributed to the pollution. So it's the ultimate in injustice that we're least responsible, but yet most impacted. This story kind of illustrates the intersections. There's a family brought this picture of these medicines from their grandson who relies on those medicines to get from day to day. He has asthma. He lives 2 miles away from a coal-fired power plant. And they talked about how he relies on those medicines to breathe. And they also sent the picture in the upper right-hand corner of him looking on as a child played in a fountain, because they said this really is illustrative of his life, that he's looking on while other children are playing, looking out the window while other children are going to school, because his lung capacities are compromised, so he can't play like other children. And because of his compromised lung capacity, it means that he can't go to school like other kids when it's on poor air quality days. And we show the picture in the lower left-hand corner, sorry, because we know that if you're living next to a toxic facility like so many African Americans are, then your property values are on average 15% lower. So if you're having a hard time paying attention in school because lead is one of the toxins that comes out of those smokestacks, or you're unable to go to school like other kids because of asthma, and as I gave the statistics around African American kids and asthma, and then on top of it all, you have less of a quality school because on average property values are 15% lower next to a toxic facility, then the deck is just stacked against you, and you're less likely to be on grade level by the third grade. And studies show that if you're not on grade level by the third grade, you're more likely to enter into the school to prison pipeline. And so this is why we have this constellation of photos to really illustrative of those intersections between health outcomes, education, and even our overrepresentation in the criminal justice system. And again, in ultimate injustice, we did this report last year called Lights Out in the Cold, Reforming Utility Shutoff Policies as if Human Rights Matter, because we were hearing too many stories of people who had their electricity shut off. They used a candle to light their homes and ended up burning down the home. They had their oil and gas cut off, so they used a space heater, and which is almost one of the top causes of house fires. One tragic story of a father who a father of 5 children, single father of 5 children, who bought a generator once his electricity was shut off, but he lived in a neighborhood where he was afraid to leave it outside because he thought it would get stolen. He brought it inside, not knowing that by morning he and all 5 of his children will be dead from carbon monoxide poisoning. And so these are the stories of people who are paying the price of poverty with their lives. This family is standing in front of their home, which, and then the backdrop is a coal-fired power plant that's one of 4 coal-fired power plants within 30-mile radius of where they live. They are in the Four Corners region out west, and they're a Navajo family, and they gifted us with this image, and they have a picture of they're holding a picture of a family member who passed away from a respiratory illness that they attributed to the coal-fired power plant. They talk about how a couple of the kids have asthma. They talk about the woman on the left who's pregnant, who they fear what the outcomes of her pregnancy will be, as they know other folks who are on the same Navajo lands who have had poor birth outcomes. And we also know that one of the toxins that comes from those smokestacks is mercury, which is a known endocrine disruptor. And so again, to add to the injustice of the situation, they, like 70% of the people on these Navajo lands that are surrounded by these 4 polluting coal-fired power plants do not have electricity. That's why those 2 coolers are on the porch, because that's how they keep whatever they need to keep cold, by getting ice and putting it in the coolers, because they do not have electricity, because the electricity from those coal plants goes to power Las Vegas and Phoenix and what used to power Los Angeles until they weaned from coal. And so again, they are not even afforded the resource that comes from the smokestacks that are polluting their lives and choking their lungs. Another situation with paying the price of poverty with their lives is this woman who was had a hard time paying her bill. Her son finally found out that she was having a hard time paying, and he paid $200 to pay off her bill. But 2 days later, that payment hadn't caught up in the system, and they shut off her electricity, which she was dependent on for her respirator. And in the dead of the heat wave in July of 2018, this woman paid the price of poverty with her life. Again, these stories are what drives us in seeing these as civil rights issues. We talk about climate impacts, whether it's the sea level rise that is overtaking lands from Kivalina, Alaska, to Thibodaux, Louisiana, to the Maldives, or in Louisiana, which has had their levees breached. And we don't have that much time left, so I won't tell you the story that goes with this. But then we know the shifts in agricultural yields means that communities that already don't have access to healthy and nutritious foods are more likely to get their food from a corner store than from a farmer's market or a grocery store, which means that their foods are high in sodium, high in sugar, high in preservatives. Not only things that are actively bad for you and which contribute to the very chronic health conditions that have made us more vulnerable to coronavirus, but they're foods that are also no access to the nutritious foods that have the fruits and the vitamins and nutrients that would help to boost our immune system and protect us from those illnesses. And so we know the frequency and severity of extreme weather events is also a result of climate change. And then again, on top of it all, too, is the ways that racism plays out in these situations. And Hurricane Katrina, these two stories were on the same day. Same circumstances, but told very differently. When it was two white people, the headline in the Associated Press is two residents wade through chest-deep floodwaters after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store. But when it's African-American male, it's a young man walks through chest-deep floodwaters after looting a grocery store. And it's those kind of differences in characterization and narrative that leads to what we saw on the Danziger Bridge when the police took the lives of people who were literally just trying to survive. And again, this calls up the memes that we're hearing now, walking while Black, jogging while Black, just trying to survive while Black, and your life is just snuffed out because you're assumed to be up to no good. So we saw after Hurricane Katrina the effects on unemployment and wages. And we also see, whether it's in a post-disaster context or even in a kind of a revitalization, they talk about the phrase urban renewal, and people have changed it to urban removal, because we see when these types of things happen, whether it's a post-disaster cleanup or it's even a climate action plan, the ways that neighborhoods get improved means that Black folks get removed and other people of color. And so the U.S. is only 4% of the global population, but 25% of the pollution that drives climate change. But yet we have such punitive immigration policies when people are literally just trying to survive, when their lands become uninhabitable because of what we've done as the United States and as polluters. And so we really need to think about how we frame and how do we execute these punitive immigration policies and really take responsibility for the fact that people are just trying to survive. And so we know how we've got here. We've got concentrated wealth in the hands of a wealthy few who are manipulating everything from our courts to our classrooms to our media, and certainly our legislatures. And so as a result, our democracy is being stomped on or swept aside. We put out this report, Fossil Fuel Foolery, that calls out the ways that the fossil fuel industry is manipulating our democracy and manipulating policymakers and manipulating communities to some extent. And so these are the top 10 tactics that you'll see if you look up the report. And so how, like we say, they suppress and undermine democracy. They contend that government regulations hurt the economy, ratepayers, and the poor people, and amplify job creation while downplaying the danger in these fossil fuel jobs. And then on top of it all, COVID-19 has impacted and compounded challenges for many. Avoiding COVID-19 is a luxury many workers can't afford. How ALEC has pushed back on mandated paid sick leave, and we see how that plays out in the context of COVID-19. Airport workers lacking training and gloves. So again, people are seen as essential workers on the front line, but protecting their lives isn't seen as an essential task that we have as a responsibility to those workers. Again, people can't afford to lose pay because, again, groups like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, pushes back on paid sick leave or even kind of a guaranteed wage that would keep people from having to be exposed in the first place. So as we talk about a just transition from these kind of exploitative domination based and extractive practices, just transition is a vision-led, unifying, and place-based set of principles, processes, and practices that build economic and political power to shift from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. So we talk about this in the context of many sectors, and I'll talk a little bit about energy, but also a few other sectors. Our current situation is that we have a $6 trillion industry. On average, coal CEOs get $9.8 million a year in compensation. The average worker gets $33,840 in compensation. African Americans as a whole pay about $41 billion in energy every year. $359 million is the amount on average in 2018 that the fossil fuel companies paid in anti-clean energy, anti-energy efficiency, all of this lobbying, that's their lobbying budgets. And yet African Americans are only 1.1% of the energy sector and get less than 0.01% of the revenue from the energy sector. And for single African American women-headed households, our average wealth is $5. And again, when you come to this country in the hull of a ship and your labor, while other white folks are building wealth, that generational wealth that they hand down to their children and their children's children, we've come with nothing, not even clothes on our backs. And we build and toil to build the country. We have no wealth accumulation. And so this is where we stand today as a result. And yet still our lives aren't valued. So as we talk about the opportunities in the new energy economy, we see places like Highland Park, Michigan, where they had their electricity shut off for their streetlights by DTE, but they did came together and crowdsourced and did fundraisers and so forth until they actually got solar lighting for their streetlights. So I'm not going to show you this video, but that's the story in a nutshell. We have folks like Amy Mays in Arizona who had her electricity shut off by the local utility there in Phoenix, where she is, and she actually just said that after they put on all these fees and then they said she had to pay a deposit, she decided she was going to go off the grid. She was just going to put away the money that she would have paid towards the bill every month until she could buy solar panel until she had enough for a solar array. And then she was an electrician, so she got up on her own roof and installed her own solar panels. And now she wrote this article, "Utility Greed locked me out of the grid, but solar panels set me free." So these are the kind of moves that we're trying to advance in the new energy economy, coming together with other organizations like Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, the Southwest Workers Union, Eastern Michigan Environmental Action Council, and others. That's Walea Johns. And we're coming together under this moniker that you can't see because you can see me, but it says power without pollution, energy without injustice. And we're working with groups like Grid Alternatives that do solar installations on people who have below 80% of the area median income. We started this initiative called the Power Up Employment Project, where we're working with Vote Solar and Grid Alternatives, and we train people who were formerly incarcerated in solar, and now they're gainfully employed in the industry. We're following in the footsteps of folks like Homeboy Industries that did the same with both not only people who were formerly incarcerated, but also former gang members in Los Angeles. They're doing the same in Chicago with the Power 52 initiative that former football player Ray Lewis started. Black Mesa Water Coalition out in Arizona is with indigenous groups that are now taking advantage of resources and starting their own solar projects that are building community wealth and assets. There's projects now available specifically for vets. We started the Solar Equity Initiative where we did a solar installation on the transitional housing for domestic violence survivor families. And then we actually, in the process, trained the domestic violence survivors. And now they are employed in the solar industry and they have the financial security that allows them to not have to feel compelled to go back to their abusers because of financial dependence. And that's the kind of multi-solving models that we like to advance. This is just talking about also the bounty of doing local food work as well. So we want to talk a little bit about some of the policies that are necessary to support this kind of just transition. The Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund is one such example. The Maryland Offshore Wind Bill, which included provisions for disadvantaged business enterprises and local hire. The Future Energy Jobs Act in Illinois included explicit engagement in the coalition of labor to push, and that's what was really at the key of the success of all of these, was making sure that labor was at the forefront of developing these pieces of legislation to ensure that there's good, well-paying economic opportunities. We're part of 100% Building Blocks kind of policy platform that includes setting concrete public health goals for frontline communities, prioritizing universal labor rights and economic benefits, and mandating strong protections for displaced workers, which include pensions, ongoing pension, ongoing health care, and a glide path to a job that has just as high and significant of a livelihood, so people aren't moving from one industry that pays well into one that doesn't. And so that's all kind of located there. And this is just kind of our intersectional advocacy agenda. I know I'm running out of time, or I'm out of time almost. And so as we talk about inclusive transition, on the board of the National Black Workers Center, where we recognize that that African-American communities face a two-dimensional job crisis of unemployment and low-wage work. We've seen that also play out in this COVID-19 situation. We make up 15% of all the essential workers, at least, but typically have a lower hourly wage than white workers. We started this initiative called the Black Labor Initiative on Just Transition, recognizing that Black communities, Black workers are at the intersection of having the communities that are most impacted negatively by the fossil fuel industry, but also many of us are working in, not many, but those of us who are working in the fossil fuel industry are kind of at that kind of, at the vice between having this as a livelihood, but also recognizing being in the very communities that are harmed and trying to reconcile and be a part of not just having the transition of to a new energy economy be something that happens to us, but something that we're in the lead of pushing for change. This is just and making sure that we actually have ownership stake in the new energy economy. This is a statement from the Black Workers for Justice, Environmental and Climate Justice Work Group. We believe that the fight for safety and survival in our communities and workplaces is an integral part of the struggle for Black liberation, workers' power, and building an economy for people and planet. So when we did the two Black labor meetings on just transition, we've come out of it with a number of different recommendations. And the groups that came together for that convening included the United Mine Workers of America, U.S. Steelworkers, SEIU, National Black Workers Center, A. Philip Randolph Institute, and the Labor Network for Sustainability, Blue Green Alliance, and others. And so there was everything from recultivation of the land to making sure that we have relocation fees and paying for displaced workers, pension projects and glide paths to retirement. We're pushing for ownership of land, land and water rights, I think, not so much air. Buying neighborhoods back through community land trusts and so forth and so on. And also pushing for policies like local hire provision and disadvantaged business enterprise provision, legal protections, business ownership of impacted communities, and so forth and so on. So this is a poem that I would have played for you, but I think looking at my clock, we only have 1 minute and about 30 seconds for Q&A. So I will mercifully end there, but that is my contact information. And hopefully we can make sure you have access to these slides if you want them, either through some centralized process through LERA, or I could send them to you directly if you email me. So thank you, and I will stop sharing and stop recording. I look forward to Q&A and discussion with you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Jackie is on chat and she's been answering questions. I think we can take another minute or two if anybody else has additional questions, and maybe we can hear from Jackie live as opposed to in writing. Just wait a second to see whether anyone has other questions for her. I did notice Stephanie Collier mentioned about federal DOL money for apprenticeship training, and I'm curious whether any of your projects tap into that, Jackie.
Thank you. Sitting on the same couch that I was yesterday. But no, for one thing, the NAACP actually doesn't take federal funding directly itself because of the advocacy work and not wanting to mix that up. But some of our partners do. For example, when we did a solar in your community initiative up in Anchorage, Alaska, we were leading on a coalition, but another coalition partner had the relationship with the federal government around the resources that they received there. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, again, I just wanted to really thank Jackie. I know for her organization and for herself, this was an incredibly challenging time to put this presentation together, and we really appreciate it. And I think this intersection of environmental justice, racial justice, and economic justice issues, we just don't see that much. So I learned a lot from even your brief presentation, and I'm going to be a lot more aware and paying attention to the kind of combination of issues that you talked about. So again, thanks so much for joining us live as well. And so to close out, I just want to remind everybody there are 5 sessions coming up in 10 minutes. We'll also have posters at 4:15 and then close the day out with happy hour, which will be organized with subgroups. So I think once you go into the system, you'll be able to figure out where you might like to be. So thanks everybody for joining us, and Jackie, thanks again.